Hello and welcome back, and welcome to a new installment here on the channel, which I'd like to call Looking Back At. So the point of this series is to look back at a team, a season, a player, a trade, a draft, etc. and discuss and analyze what happened and what could have happened to said topic. So if we're talking about a team, what could have been with that team? If we're talking about a player, what could have been with that player? You get the idea. And I thought I'd start off with the 2010-11 Vancouver Canucks. Now we all know how this season ended for them, and I know it's tough for Canucks fans to look back at and talk about, but it was an amazing season and an amazing run that just fell one game short of being the dream season. So let's look back at the 2010-11 Vancouver Canucks. President's Trophy winner by 10 points, Art Ross and Ted Lindsay winner and Daniel Sedin. And this was when the Sedin brothers were at the height of their careers. In the season before, Henrik Sedin had won the Art Ross and Hart Trophy. Luongo was playing good, although his form in the playoffs was a bit volatile. He was still at his peak here, and he was even nominated for the Vezina Trophy, so he had a really good regular season, and he was good at times in the playoffs, but I'll get to that later. But we also had players that now, 9 years later, are easy to forget about. Christian Ehrhoff, for example, was the 4th best point scorer on this team with 50 points and 14 goals as a defenseman. That's really good, and he was their anchor on the blue line. And then we have players like Alex Burrows, who's basically a cult hero now, and he scored that goal. We all know what goal I'm talking about. One of the biggest goals in Canucks history, and I guess I have to talk about it. That Game 7 overtime winner against the Blackhawks. But to understand the importance of this goal, we need to go back a few years, because even though this is a Game 7 overtime winner, which in itself is incredible, it's deeper than that. The Blackhawks and the Canucks had been going at it for 2 playoff series before this in 2009 and 2010, and in 2010 when Chicago beat Vancouver, they went on to win Stanley Cup, which must have sucked for the Canucks. So when this series came around a 3rd time in a row and the Canucks took a stranglehold 3-0 series lead, you would think it's over, but the Blackhawks fight their way back to a Game 7 in Vancouver. And now the scene is set. The Canucks take an early lead, they hold on to it, but then with less than 2 minutes remaining, the Blackhawks tie it up and force overtime. And that's when Alex Burrows steps up for one of the most iconic moments in Canucks history.
Finally, after 3 seasons and 19 playoff games against Chicago, for Vancouver, it's a wonderful day for an exorcism.
Just incredible. They exercise their demons and move on. And they move on all the way to the Stanley Cup final. And on their way to the final, they beat Nashville and San Jose, and now they're in the final against the Boston Bruins. Now we all know how this ends, like I said earlier, but what's really interesting is looking at this final game by game, because almost every game in this series is in stark contrast to the next. Look, Game 1 Vancouver wins 1-0, Game 2 Vancouver wins 3-2 in overtime. Not that much of a difference, but then Game 3, boom, the Bruins win 8-1. But to me, what's most remarkable is the fact that 4 of the 7 games resulted in a shutout for either goalie. Luongo had 2 shutouts in Game 1 and Game 5, and Tim Thomas had a shutout in Game 4, and most importantly, Game 7. And I bring that up because a lot of blame is shifted on Luongo, and while some of that might be warranted, he didn't have the best stats, he still had 2 shutouts in the Stanley Cup final, so he wasn't terrible. I guess the clutch just wasn't there from his side. But you also have to blame the stars of this team. Henrik Sedin only got 1 point throughout the entire series, and that was a goal that came in Game 6 when they were already down 4-0, so at that point it had no impact on the game whatsoever. Daniel Sedin was a bit better. 4 points in those 7 games is still not good enough, but when you look at the stats of the Canucks and compare them to the Bruins, you realize you can't just blame the Sedins or Luongo. On the Bruins, 16 players registered at least a point, compared to 12 for the Canucks. So the stars were firing for the Bruins, and they also had the secondary scoring. See what I did there? But of course, injuries were also a huge problem for the Canucks. I mentioned Christian Ehrhoff earlier and how he had a great season. He was playing through an injury he sustained in the conference final. Ryan Kessler, who scored 41 goals in the regular season, was playing through a groin injury. And there were more players as well who had to take painkiller shots before each game. And the Canucks had already gone through 3 hard-fought series and got severely banged up, and going into the Stanley Cup final against the big, bad Bruins, it won't get any easier. And to add to their already dire list of injuries, they lost Mason Raymond early in Game 6. Now, I'm not here to make excuses for the Canucks. Each team goes through injuries, and it's hard to say exactly how much this affected them, but it definitely did. But that's not to say the Bruins didn't have any injury problems. I mean, they lost Nathan Horton to that awful hit in Game 3, and he missed the rest of the final. Another reason why the Canucks didn't win the cup was thanks to Tim Thomas. This man had one of the most unbelievable Stanley Cup final performances of all time, and his entire season was incredible. And not only did he win the Stanley Cup and the Conn Smythe Trophy, he also won the Vezina Trophy, so it's fair to say he had a pretty good season. But when you look back at this team and think what could have been, it's pretty sad because now we know this was the closest the Canucks got to winning the cup with the Sedins. And to answer the question, what could have been? I think it's pretty easy and obvious. They could have been Stanley Cup champions. They were one game away and it doesn't really get any closer than that. It would have been a brilliant way to cap off that season, winning the President's Trophy, exercising their demons by beating the Blackhawks, and then going all the way to win the Stanley Cup. But they couldn't, and unfortunately, I think a lot of people hold this Stanley Cup final loss against the Sedins and their legacy. And while I do agree they weren't the best they could have been in the final, I won't let this affect the way I look back at their careers, because they were just too good. Obviously, adding a cup to the resume would have been the cherry on top, but sometimes things aren't just meant to be, I guess. And also a quick side note, I chose not to bring up the riots following Game 7 because I don't think they bring anything of value when you talk about hockey. It's as simple as that. But that's gonna be it for today. If you like this kind of throwback video, make sure you hit the like button and tell me what you would like to see next in this series. And also, I made a Discord for the channel, so if you would like to join, I'll leave a link in the description and we can talk there. And I thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.